thanks everyone so much for being here today. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to speak about one of my favorite places in South Florida, and a project I'm really delighted to be just a very small part of that's going on at the Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse Outstanding Natural Area. So as Emma mentioned, I'm the director for FPAN's Southeast Southwest region. We are hosted down here at Florida Atlantic University. And like other regions of FPAN, our missions is tripartite, assisting local governments, education, outreach, and assisting the State Division of Historical Resources. So the southern region covers all 9 counties south of Lake Okeechobee, and this is what it's going to look like with 2 feet of sea level rise. So you can see a lot of our coastal areas are impacted, and then I always like to remind people that in this NOAA mapping, the interior is not yet mapped, so that's probably also going to be impacted. Here are the unified sea level rise projections for Southeast Florida from the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. And I'd like to just mention that when we are talking about sea level rise is happening because of climate change. And climate change is, of course, happening because we are burning additional fossil fuels in the environment, which is adding to, if you think about the greenhouse gas effect as a blanket. So it's like we're adding layers to the blanket and trapping more of the sun's heat into our environment. So as we trap more heat into the environment and as temperatures rise, we'll start to see increased sea level rise, increased severity in storms, increased variability and unpredictability in weather and climate. What does that mean, though, on the local level? So when we talk about the Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse Outstanding Natural Area, here is the site right here. It's along the Palm Beach and Martin County border. So here is the parcel. So it's managed by the Bureau of Land Management. And then the site we'll be discussing today is primarily along the southern area. So it is right along the Loxahatchee River right there. So the Bureau of Land Management designated the Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse Outstanding Natural Area in 2008, and they designated it as to be managed to protect, conserve, and enhance the unique and nationally important values for the benefit of current and future generations. So there are 7 values, right? Historic, cultural, natural, scientific, educational, recreational, and scenic. So the idea is that you want people to be able to come and appreciate the site. And the site is, of course, most famous for the lighthouse, but the history of the site actually dates back long before then. So we have an archaic component of the site. So the site is multi-component, and I like to say if you count the interns that the Bureau of Land Management has living on the site today, it's been continuously occupied for about 6,000 years. So when we think about this site, just try and remember that when we are looking at erosion and the impacts of climate change, we're looking at something that's impacting something that is 6,000 years old. So here's a really, infographic from research that FAU's Department of Advanced Geomatics Engineering Lab has been doing. This research is led by Dr. Sukahar Nagarajan. And what they've done is they've analyzed the historic loss of shoreline using unmanned aerial systems, and then compared it to the rate of erosion of the shoreline after Irma. So here is their graphic, and I'll have Rachel pop the link to this article in the chat box for everyone. But it shows, so this article by Dr. Nagarajan estimates that the shoreline has lost about 23 meters in the last 50 years. And here, again, we're concerned with what's going on along the southern portion of the site. So after transect 170, 180 here. Here's a historic view of the southwest shoreline from the lighthouse. So everyone keep this view in mind, because this is what it looks like today. So actually, I'll go back just a second. So if you look down here, I want everyone to pay attention to the location of the cemetery that's just here. So you can see this small box, that's actually a very small cemetery, and then the corner of the building here. So when we look at that today, or this is fairly recent, this is a 2019 view, here's that same corner of the building, and here's the same cemetery. So we've lost a pretty extensive section of shoreline since the historic photo was taken. So I'll go back to discuss the impact of Hurricane Irma. And again, this is the research that's been done by Dr. Sukahar Nagarajan and Monica Rajkumar from FAU's Advanced Geomatics Engineering Lab. So they were actually looking at fluctuations in the rate of erosion over time. So they see that the rate of shoreline retreat increased from, so they essentially expected annually, or in this period that they were analyzing right after Hurricane Irma, that they'd lose about 9 centimeters of shoreline. But instead, what they found is after Hurricane Irma, they were losing 55 centimeters. So I don't know if you all recall when Sara talked about using the Aero 100 to map sites and that it had an error of maybe 30 centimeters. So when we are trying to document shoreline erosion, it's important to try and be as precise as possible. So we're obviously very excited. We have the Aero Gold, but Dr. Nagarajan and FAU estimated that the hurricane contributed to about 117.63 meters squared of material removed from the shoreline. And again, when you see something like material removed from the shoreline, it sounds incredibly clinical. Remember, we're talking about 6,000 years of history. So we're talking about shell midden material, we're talking about artifacts, we're talking about the loss of that information on the site. So basically the area lost about 2 meters of shoreline in a 3-month period. And the shoreline loss was really accelerated by Irma. And the site experienced, even though the site wasn't significantly impacted physically, right, the buildings and things were all okay after, you still have this really intense erosional episodes. So I think it's a lesson that even when we don't maybe see very severe damage, these storms are still incredibly impactful to the site and have these dramatic effects. So what does this look like on the ground? How does this fit in with HMS? So we held our first heritage monitoring Scouts workshop with the Bureau of Land Management on January 19th, 2017. So there we are all walking around the site pre-Irma, not a care in the world. This is post-Matthew, so the site had lost some material due to Hurricane Matthew, even though it wasn't really a significant impact in that area compared to what I saw visiting Sara and her team up in Northeast Florida after that. And as we continue to do workshops around the site, we did multiple repeat trainings and repeat site visits from 2016 to the present. And we just really saw a continuation, like significant erosion of material each time we would go, right? So we would see, we have a classroom visit in 2018, documenting volunteers. On the right, we have a picture of us in front of the Lighthouse, shortly pre-COVID, our last pre-COVID training in February of 2020. And each time we would go out, we would see things like pottery eroding along the shoreline. Not only would we see the impacts from things like storms and erosion, but we would also see things like visitor impacts. So if you look at your screen on the top left, what's going on there is that people are climbing up from their boats. So people will park their boats along the eastern boundary of the property and then actually climb up this site. And then what they're doing is, unfortunately, they're impacting the midden material by climbing into this area. So every time we would go, we would really see, it would physically look different to us, like it would be noticeable and visible change from all these different factors. So even things like heavy rain, visitor traffic, etc. So this really brings in an important discussion that Sara pointed out, which is the importance of repeat monitoring, right? So Sara said going out to these sites multiple times allowed us to observe the changes. And this is really critical. So here's a photo of the site on top from September 7th, 2017, on the top left of your screen. So check out, you see there's a bench there, there's all this area of the site. And again, remember, this is all part of this archaeological site, this documented archaeological site. And then on the bottom, you see what the site looks like on February 15th of 2020. So as you can see, not only is the bench gone, but that entire section of site has been eroded away or taken away by storms. So we're really seeing palpable and accelerating decline at the site. And we were seeing artifacts onshore each time we went out. So we were seeing pottery, we were seeing midden material, we were seeing black dirt midden exposed, etc. So that's along the southwestern shoreline there. And then we had, again, other impacts. So when I talk about climate change, I always like to talk about the climate change as a threat multiplier, right? So what you have in this slide is in 2018, there was a washout, and this is not from a storm, this is not from a significant weather impact, this is from the compound effects of climate change, where you had essentially a heavy rain that overwhelmed 20th century infrastructure. So it washed out this road and created this large gaping hole into the midden. So we see the midden exposed on the left-hand side of your screen, and then on the top right, we have my colleague Malachi Fenn actually sketching out that midden. So we have documentation of the area, and then we just have a close-up detailed view of the midden. So again, this is not one single storm event that did this. This is the just again heavy rain and this the compound impact of wave action at the site and erosion at the site. So I'm happy that the Bureau of Land Management acted really swiftly and decisively to actually try and reduce the impact to the site. So again, in the top left, you see what it looked like in 2018 when it was exposed. And then they were actually able to put a textile down in there and then pack it with riprap to try and reduce, again, the wave action at the site and the erosion at the site to try and stabilize this a little bit. So I'm delighted that happened. Another issue we identified at the site was an eroding shell midden. So we saw in March of 2018 that there was midden material visible. So we started to see erosion of shells and other material. Then in 2021, actually a large section of this midden collapsed and then continued to erode. So as many of you who have documented eroding sites are familiar with, you get sort of like an overhang, right, of material, and then the material underneath erodes out, and then the overhang falls out, and then you just lose more and more of the site, and then you are literally watching the site erode into the sea, or in this case, the Loxahatchee River. So once we saw that, we made a recommendation, stating that the southern boundary of the site was eroding rapidly and palpably, and that the time scale was not, years, it was really days and weeks of losing the site. And then also that the loss of evidence of early use of the site by pre-contact groups was irreparable. And few examples remain of these types of sites in heavily developed South Florida, so it's critical to protect them. So we're never going to make another archaic shell midden, right? We're never going to make more World War II Coast Guard era trash pits. These are things that are finite, and it's really important to document them, and especially in Palm Beach County, where our coastal area is being developed so heavily and so rapidly. We don't really have a lot of evidence of sites that date from these periods. So the site is so precious and so unique, and it's so critical to protect it. But unfortunately, right, you can't just take an archaeological site and put it on the shelf. So what do you do? So I'm delighted to say that at the moment, this is why I say I'm so happy to be just a small part of this project. The Jupiter Inlet District and the Bureau of Land Management have funded a project to actually stabilize this shoreline. So the project is currently being executed by the Jupiter Inlet District in coordination with the Bureau of Land Management. And I really just want to acknowledge and I'm so grateful and thankful to both the Bureau of Land Management and the Jupiter Inlet District and their board, for recognizing the importance of this property and devoting the resources to stabilize this and the opportunity to protect and educate through use of this living shoreline that they're currently constructing. So here you see just a little shot of the plan. And then here is a shot. So this, if you remember our historic photo, here is what the site kind of looks like at the moment. So you see There are these little riprap islands to try and mitigate some of the wave action at the site in the hopes that that will stabilize the shoreline a little bit more. And then they're also building a dock here. So it's so you have the opportunity to actually go out and observe the site. So I know when we think about climate change and when we think about archaeological sites, and as we're all out there documenting our archaeological sites being lost to these different factors, it's important not to feel powerless or helpless or think that there's nothing you can do, right? Because there are things that you can do. So step one, document. You can't fix something if you don't know that there's an issue. So that is the entire goal of our Heritage Monitoring Scouts program. I always say, I think Sarah Miller is one of the most brilliant people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I think her development of this program has been so instrumental into us really learning more about our archaeological resources in South Florida. So document, document, document. Use repeat visits, right? Because we want to analyze and assess the nature and the speed of the impact. So it is helpful to know what you're going to lose tomorrow and what you're going to lose 5 years from now, and try and prioritize based on that. And then we also want to then develop and implement a plan. So I'm so fortunate. There are so many researchers that are working out on this site up at the Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse, outstanding natural area. I'm very fortunate to just be a small part of that and to have our volunteers and staff going out and documenting that. What is happening at that site with the shoreline stabilization, it may not be right or appropriate for every single site, but it could be right for yours. So thank you to the Bureau of Land Management and to the Jupiter Inlet District for preserving and protecting thousands of years of Florida history. Thanks, of course, to the Division of Historical Resources for funding our Heritage Monitoring Scouts program. Thank you to John Sullivan, the archaeologist for the Bureau of Land Management, and of course, Dr. Nagarajan, as well as all of these other people. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you so much.